This podcast contains themes of suicide and may upset some listeners. If you're struggling with your mental health and need to talk now, call Lifeline anytime. They're available 24 hours, 7 days a week.
You know, I'd have this great big grin on me and I was dying on the inside.
This paralysis of just not being able to do things that gave me pleasure.
I hated the world, hated the farm, ultimately wanted to sell it.
Everything that was going wrong in my life was somebody else's fault.
A lot of men and women will say, I just don't feel right.
Aussies love the bush, but sometimes the bloody bush doesn't love us back. I'm John Harper, just a simple joker talking about why mental health is everybody's business and what to do if you think a mate is struggling.
This podcast is a Room 3 production and brought to you by our mates at Gotcha for Life and the Murrumbidgee Primary Health Network. You'll be hearing the lived experiences of everyday folk in rural and remote Australia. The language can be strong at times and references of suicide may upset some people, so consider who's around when listening. The advice in this podcast is of a general nature and is not an excuse for you not seeing your own GP or medical professional. Mate Helping Mate has plenty of links on our website of trusted service providers across the country. Head to matehelpingmate.org.au.
I hated the world, hated the farm. I felt that it was the farm was the problem that was giving me all this angst. If a bolt rolled off the bench in the workshop, a spanner would go through the wall. And the simplest things would go wrong, and I would rant and rave, and I would go off, and it would be more often than not nobody saw it. If something happened and there was someone around, I would maintain my rage and just ignore it. But then when they'd leave, it'd fly. It'd have to come out of me, and so I'd be ridiculous.
Back again, podcasters. Thank God for that, otherwise I'd be flapping me gums for nothing. I've got a good mate here, Chris Wilson. Willow, we call him. 5th generation farmer, wheat sheep man. His story is that there he was, happy as Larry. The sky was the limit. Shit happens, and it's how he dealt with that, or didn't deal with it in some instances, and where he is today. Good day, Willow. Thanks for coming out to the farm. I'm not going to say how you're going because I know you're going great. Yeah?
Yeah, I am. Thank you.
I knew you were. Chris, as I said, you're a long-time farmer and the sky was the limit. What went on? When you were okay, what was it looking like for you, the future?
Look, for me, I guess life was a rosy, optimistic opportunity. I grew up in a loving family. I was the second of 5 children. Mum and Dad were awesome with us. They gave us every opportunity. And for me, I wanted to take on an opportunity on the land, and that was available. I was excited. I was going to set the world on fire. You know, I had ridiculous amounts of self-belief, and I honestly thought that I could achieve quite a lot, and I couldn't wait to get my teeth into it.
And what about now?
Exactly the same. You know, I wake up every day and I can't wait to get going and get my teeth into it again.
And so the period in between that initial stage of the sky's the limit and now, was it always the same? Were those years in between the same?
Oh, God, no. No, I can honestly say I went over the abyss and I hit rock bottom. I will say that my journey into depression was a long, slow walk. Like into cold water, and it wasn't until I was up to my neck that I realised I was in trouble. But I certainly saw the depths of depression and lived it, and I understand that journey quite well.
So what tipped you over the edge? What started the shit happening?
Unfortunately, in our family, my youngest brother Matt was working with me one day, and we were out on the farm feeding cattle, and he had an accident and he died. Which, you know, in anyone's life, a family member dying is a hell of a tragedy. And I was 24 years of age at the time. You know, in those days, this is back in the early 90s. And in those days, you know, you were still sort of expected to, in my mind especially, to keep up the appearances, put on a strong, happy face and get out there and don't show too many emotions and, and deal with things and get on with your life. I was in an up-and-coming role with the family business, and I wanted to show that I was capable and determined and, ready for this job. So I didn't want, anyone to see, family or friends to notice that I wasn't coping. And ultimately, for me, I struggled with the idea of grief. I struggled with the idea of actually showing my emotions to my friends and letting them know that I was a normal human being and that I was grieving for my little brother. So I chose not to show that grief. And I struggled with it, and I sat myself down and personally made this decision that I knew I had two choices. I knew I had the choice of owning up to my family that I'm not coping and that I need help, and regardless of what that help would be, but I would need to ask some family members and possibly my friends that you're going to have to help me. Or I could swallow my problem and know for one fact that I will never get rid of that problem, that I'll always have it, but I could swallow that problem and deal with it later.
So did you really understand that at that time, or believe that at that time, that if you ignored it, that you could deal with it later, that it might even go away?
Look, for me, looking back on it, I understand that it's quite insightful to actually understand this, and it shows a level of intelligence, and yet at the same time it proved that I was absolutely stupid. As a 24-year-old male who had the normal insecurities that young people had or have, the fact that I could, if I was a stronger character, I would have probably put my hand up and said, "Can you help me? This is something that I've got to deal with." It was confronting. My personality was probably a little bit weaker than that, which I didn't want anyone to know about. So I chose the easy option. For me, it was a lot easier to swallow the problem, put on a happy face, and get out there and pretend that everything was okay. Here was a classic example of a problem that I should have gone to my parents with, and I hid it from them. I hid it from my family, my friends, everyone.
So if you had shared your problem at that stage, you possibly wouldn't have gone through as much grief later on in your life.
Oh, look, I honestly believe that if I'd shared that problem way back in 91, 92, I would have gone through grief like we do. I would have come out the other side, and I would never have experienced a mental illness.
And that doesn't mean that you forget about your brother, any of that. It just means that you can move forward with your life.
Yeah.
So then for the ensuing years after that, when you hadn't, or before you shared your problem, what was your life like? What was happening with it?
Look, for me, it's more than just one episode that created my mental health issues. My brother dying was a hell of a tragedy, and ultimately tripped me up and got me into that cycle downwards of depression. But then later on, I guess after living with it for about 4 or 5 years, things leveled out for me a bit, and an opportunity for a relationship came along because I'd stepped away from relationships for a while. And then ultimately, within 12 months, that relationship failed. And then my world imploded again, but probably 10 times worse than it had when Matt died. And that really, that knocked me over. I couldn't believe that, I felt worse after a relationship breakup than when my brother died. Like, it didn't make sense. But ultimately what it was is that I'd eroded all my resilience to stress and to coping in life. And a small relationship, because it wasn't a very, it was a fairly stock standard little relationship. It wasn't I don't believe it had that a huge amount of meaning. But for me, I was clinging to it because I felt that I was coming out the other side, and I thought this was my opportunity to climb out and get back into daylight again. And then this relationship ended. And
about that time, was there also pressure farming-wise? Was the drought starting to bite then? Or?
I was actually coming to the point where we were about to take over the farm. But look, it was just another part in my life, and I remember just really struggling after that for another year or two, couple of years. 2 or 3 years, I guess. So I've had this incident, and then a few years later on, when the Millennium Drought came along, and then we just completed succession planning with our family business. So I was taking on the farm, taking on more debt, and getting what I'd ultimately dreamed of, getting my own farm. And I was coming off the back of a good financial year. I'd managed to line my ducks up in a row that year and do everything right, get the farm going well. everything's really good, and then the drought hits, and I've got no resilience at all. So anytime anything went wrong, I used to really fall over and get in my hole, and which was quite debilitating because it would mean that I'd be stuck inside for days because I'd be too scared and anxious to get out to face whatever little problem might be out there. And
Was it your fault, or were you blaming other people? Were you angry?
Oh yeah, I hated the world, hated the farm, ultimately wanted to sell it. I felt that it was the farm was the problem that was giving me all this angst, and I felt that if I sell the farm and you know it'd be, and I had these grand ideas that it was the best farm in the district and I'd get this huge amount of money, which was ridiculous because the farm was probably showing signs of neglect, and it's because I was neglecting a lot of my responsibilities. And if I'd sold that farm, I would have been like a ship without an anchor, and I probably would have blown my cash and been in a worse situation. So
feeling poorly, you isolated yourself, and in that isolation, you were prepared to make life-changing decisions, which, in hindsight, if you had took them, probably would have been disastrous.
Devastating.
Yeah, devastating.
The farm was ultimately the best thing for me. It gave me not only a purpose, but it gave me an anchor, gave me somewhere to hang on to. I was very lucky because I worked for myself, so I could choose what days to work. I didn't have to front up to a boss, and I could hide. Basically, I could hide. Not only was it good for me, but it was also bad for me because it gave me a refuge to hide myself away and keep myself out of public eye. I should say that it was interesting. I felt that I swallowed a pea-sized problem. I can honestly recall driving around the farm one Friday afternoon. Normally I'd be starting to get excited and agitated about leaving work so I could go and visit my friends in a public house somewhere and have a fun Friday night out. And all of a sudden I didn't want to go. I had an ache inside, and I had this just dull, painful energy, like a darkness in me. I wasn't happy anymore. I didn't want to go. But I knew I had to go because I had to keep up appearances. So, and it was slight to start with, but next week it was a little bit more, and the following week was a little bit more, and it always grew, and it slowly grew to consume me. I just slowly started feeling worse and worse, and was less inclined to go out. My anxiety levels started to rise. I'd be nervous about going out because I was thinking that everyone was watching me, that everyone might know that I had a problem.
And if they were watching you, they might see the cracks.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. They'd see through your facade. Far out.
Look, for me to go out to a party on a weekend, I would have to work myself up for several hours beforehand just to get out of the house to go and visit my friends, which meant that I was always late. And then it would take me days and days afterwards to get out of the couch to go back to work because I'd be so flat. And then, but opportunities came up in life to travel, and look, I've always had a fascination with old cars, and so I was able to take those opportunities, and they were great times of relief and release from my mental illness. But like anything in life, whether it's a weekend or a trip away or a distraction for a moment, you always come back to who you are and where you are. And so I would always come back to my depression.
So I think for me it seems to be interesting that at the start you weren't miserable 24/7, but those periods of feeling miserable and down were getting longer and longer. You were getting further down the slide. You were slipping further into a dark hole. Yeah, basically.
And it was perplexing because I used to be eternally happy. And I remember thinking about it one day, why is this happening to me? I felt that I wasn't the luckiest kid in the world. I thought there were plenty of people out there that had more opportunities than me, but I always felt that I was in a lucky situation, and I was always happy. And then here, I'm not happy. Now why did that happen to me? I thought, well, maybe that's my lot in life. That's it. I got 24 years of happiness, and from now on, I'm just going to be that grumpy old shit.
And what was your behaviour like when you went out, when you went to the parties or you went out to the public houses with your friends? Yeah. What was your behaviour like?
Elevated. I think I was probably always a fairly gregarious sort of a kid, but I was out there. I had to prove to everyone that I was fine. So I was louder than most. I was crazier than most. I took risks. I think I drank probably pretty hard, probably too hard. And I put on a happy face. So the weird part of it was I probably got a lot of recognition for what I was doing. So a lot of people got to know me. A lot of people thought that, he's this happy larrikin sort of a fella, when in actual fact, I'd have this great big grin on me and I was dying on the inside, absolutely dying on the inside. And yeah, it was ridiculous.
And that's a fair dinkum description, isn't it?
Yeah,
Dying
absolutely.
on the inside. It's not just a term.
I'd be laughing and carrying on in the pub and not one bit of me was happy at all.
Far out. So what was the light bulb moment for you? Did something, you have an epiphany, sitting on the dunny and suddenly think, shit, I've got a problem, I better go and see somebody. What happened? Did you have that yourself?
Yeah, I would say, no, I didn't have an epiphany. When I knew when I had a real problem was when I might be driving around the farm and or even just sitting in the chair watching telly. And the idea about suicide had come into my mind, and I would
seriously contemplate.
This idea would just come into my mind, and then all the pain and angst that I would carry and feel 24/7 would evaporate. And then I'd feel my old self. The old me would come out for a brief moment. And
because you thought, what, you had a solution?
Well, that was it. And it's a trick of the mind, but it would just pop in my head, and I'd think, geez, that's it. And I'd feel wonderful again, only for a minute or two. And then I'd probably fall into despair after that, because I knew what a death would do to my parents. A second death would be beyond them. I'd seen what a death had done in our family, and I just knew I couldn't do it.
This podcast has been made possible by our mates at the Gotcha for Life Foundation. Gotcha for Life was established to reverse the tide of declining mental health and to reduce suicide rates by taking action and having a positive outcome on mental health. Gotcha for Life enables communities to build mental fitness, social connection, emotional muscle and resilience. Head to gotchaforlife.org to catch events, get involved or donate. This podcast has also been brought to you by the Murrumbidgee Primary Health Network, also known as the MPHN for short. The MPHN's Empowering Our Communities grant is a government's way of walking the talk, demonstrating their commitment to supporting families and communities living with the impacts of drought, with a focus on mental health and well-being.
My story is bloody similar. Not about losing a brother and that, but the bit about contemplating suicide. I never went through it, and I'm bloody grateful for it. And it comes back to ties. You were saying how the farm grounded you and you had a good family.
Yeah.
Well, I was saying there's two reasons why I never went through it. And that was, one, that I felt so much of a failure that I thought I would fail in any attempt, and it scared the hell out of me that I'd be stuck in a wheelchair for the rest of my life and be a burden. Be more of a burden on anybody than anything else. And the other thing I think that really saved me was the fact that I had my daughters then, and I just couldn't bear the thought of them finding me. And I think that's the main reason. So it was the ties, the relationships.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, and I guess that's what saved me. And but at the same time, I would then realise that I'm stuck in this. I'm stuck in this hole. I can't get out. I can't die, but I can't live.
So you at that stage you kind of acknowledged you got a problem, but you still couldn't. You didn't have the energy to address it.
Oh, by that stage, I'm at the lowest I've ever been. I'm struggling to get out to go to work. I'm really hating life. And I think the cracks were starting to show on my facade in a public sense. And but I'm stuck. I can't go forwards and I can't go backwards. And it's starting to worry me at that stage. It's just shit.
But you didn't die. You're here, mate. I can see you. You ain't no bloody ghost.
Yeah.
So, did you help yourself?
No, couldn't. The most frustrating thing about a mental illness or depression for me was the lethargy. After I'd had a big weekend, I'd be stuck in the chair and I could be there for 3 or 4 days. And that would probably be pretty bad. But, most of the time I couldn't get around to do anything. So I used to struggle on the farm to get things done on time, and fear of failure would get me up to get those things done. Just the lethargy that you feel with depression, you haven't got any energy to deal with it. Plus, it's just so bloody confronting. And you think that for me, I ultimately lived it for about, between 12, 15 years, something like that. It's a bit blurry to try and really know when you got it or not. But I know at the end, my problems, they were bigger than Mount Everest. And there wasn't a person in this world that was going to be able to solve them. And let alone, I wasn't prepared to climb. It was daunting. It was really frightening to actually have to go down that path.
Yeah, no, I was the same, mate. I tell you, it is frustrating knowing. I mean, you've got the knowledge within yourself, I believe, that you're struggling, that you've got problems.
Yeah.
But bugger me, can you get off your ass to even just open your mouth and ask for help?
Yeah.
I mean, your story is exactly the same, I suppose, to mine. It wasn't my parents, it was my wife. But I mean, you knew that if you said one word for help, you just said help to your parents, it was there.
Yeah. Absolutely.
You don't have the energy to open your stinking mouth.
No, but also if I said to one person, especially someone close to me, that I need help, that my life's not right, I'd let the cat out of the bag, and then it would chase me down. And so then you'd have the problem that they'd be coming at you. Come on, we want to help you. We want to get at you. But I wasn't at that stage. I couldn't. I was too frightened to actually tackle it, because I felt that it was going to be this horrible journey.
I wonder if you've kind of hit the nail on the head. I mean, you can't fix a problem till you acknowledge it.
Yeah.
So you can say, I'm struggling or whatever else. How did you end up being here?
Well, like I mentioned a minute ago, the cracks were starting to show in my facade, and I went to town one weekend, stayed at my sister's, and we'd had a big weekend at the races or something, and I stayed there on Sunday night. Didn't want to go back to the farm on Sunday night. Probably knew I should have gone back to feed the dogs, but just didn't want to go back into that hole. Stayed the night. Monday morning, my sister said to me, there's something wrong with you. What's going on? I can see that you're not right. Are you, what's up? Are you all right or what? And I heard myself saying to her that, geez, you know what? I think I'm depressed. I'm not right. And at that moment, I absolutely shat myself because I'd let the cat out of the bag. I knew that I'd probably, it was like a moment of relief, but also a moment of absolute terror, because I'd let the cat out of the bag for the first time in 15 years.
But also, are you in terror because to a certain extent you've left go of your control of your life to a certain extent? You knew your sister loved you and you knew she was going to do something.
Oh, yeah, she'd be like a dog with a bone. She wasn't going to let me go. Yeah.
Bloody good sister.
So I, look, and she explained to me that after Matt died, she had, experienced a bit of depression and was anxious and whatever. So she went and saw a psychologist, and she said, I only needed one visit. And I went in there and bawled my eyes out. And she said, I came out feeling fine. She said, you can do this. And I knew she was right. I knew that, this would have to ultimately be my path. But at the same time, I was really frightened about, taking that first step, because I had a mountain of problems that were, really were to me about as big as Mount Everest.
Well, Mount Everest, yeah, you said that.
So I'd said to her, look, hang on a minute, I'll just go and grab my phone out of the ute and I'll come back. And I ducked out of the house, jumped in the ute and took off because I was too shit scared. Like it really was confronting. And I drove away crying my eyes out because I'd let go an opportunity to actually do something. I knew I couldn't do it on my own, but I knew I was just too scared to face it. And I was bawling. It was ridiculous.
And what did dear old sister end up having to do to you,
Oh,
Chris?
yeah. Well, like I said, she wouldn't let it go. And to her credit, she didn't harp on it. She didn't, ring me and bawl me about it,
But she knew
constantly.
you. She knew you'd get you back up and would do the opposite.
She waited for the right opportunity. And it was about 2 or 3 months later, I was back in again, staying at her place. And the same thing, stayed Sunday night. And Monday morning, she came in and she said, look, I've locked all the doors and windows. You're not getting out. We're going to do something about this today. And I guess I was at that stage, I really was at my bottom, my ultimate bottom. And I just said, righto, bugger it. We'll do it. And we opened up the phone book. I knew exactly what page to look up to because I'd opened that phone book about a dozen times. And in the intervening months, and looked at psychologists. I knew it was there, just ring one. I didn't really choose anyone in particular. I just saw a number and we dialed it and made an appointment. It was unbelievable. The woman at the other end of the line said to me, it'll be 2 weeks before you can get in, and could you tell us who referred you? And I thought about it and said, my sister. And
a qualified expert.
Yeah, the woman at the other end of the line paused, and then she said, "Are you going to be all right?" And I said, "Yeah, look, I'm going to be fine, thanks." And I hung up the phone and I turned to my sister and just told her that she'd saved my life, and we just had a great big cry together. But it was good. At that point, I felt that was the last time I had a sinking feeling in my stomach, and it was the last time that the pain and angst grew. I touched the bottom and I started going up after that.
So did the counsellor or psychologist give you specific answers, or did she just listen to you when you worked out your own pathway back up the slide, or what?
It was interesting, my psychologist. I honestly thought she didn't understand a word I was saying. I was telling her one thing, she would repeat back something else. And I found that a bit frustrating. So sometimes when I thought that she had no idea about what was going on, she actually did. And our final session, we had about half a dozen sessions, and she said, "Look, I think you're good to go after this." And she explained what I've been going through and all the rest. And she was perfect. She understood it. And ultimately for me, it was okay to fail. It was okay to make mistakes. I was just a perfectionist. My world had to be, clear and concise and perfect. And she said, "You know what? It doesn't have to be. And you need to learn that you can have a bad day." And that was one of the strategies I was able to use to get myself out of tough times after that. When I was having a bad day, I could learn to accept that was all right, and instantly my problems would evaporate, and I'd make a better decision, and I was able to move forward, and which meant that my journey for recovery has been a long one, but it's been a positive one every step. And I would hit ceilings, and I would get to points where I felt I was much better, but the fact that I had a few little simple strategies that I could work with to understand that it's going to get better, it meant that I was always able to strive for a better me and create that.
So what are some of these simple strategies? So when I was not at my worst, but when I was in that period of my life, I would anger. Small things would get me cranky as hell. And I can remember once I was down at the sheep yards and I was drafting fat lambs, and one of the lambs wouldn't go up the drafting race. And there happened to be a shovel in the yards. So I picked the shovel up and I donged the lamb on the head. Ironed it out. Didn't kill it, ironed it out. Unbeknownst to me, my daughter, who was about 2, maybe a little bit older, but she was still in nappies, saw me. Dad, and I can still see it today, running up the hill to the house, going, Mom, Dad's killed a lamb. And I thought, shit. And from that, I learned to walk away. So when I got cranky, and at that stage, I'd get cranky in the yards, my dogs would quit working. They'd go and jump on the back of the ute or the motorbike because they knew I'd give them a hiding or something for no reason.
Yeah.
So I learned to just go. When I got cranky, I'd walk up the house, have a cup of coffee, whatever, go back. Everything was great. That was a little simple strategy that made me feel better. What kind of things did you do then, and what do you do now to keep on top of things?
If a bolt rolled off the bench in the workshop, a spanner would go through the wall. And the simplest things would go wrong, and I would rant and rave, and more energy would come out of me than needed to, and I would go off, and it would be absolutely ridiculous. Now, sometimes the old man saw that, but more often than not, nobody saw it. So if something happened and there was someone around, I would maintain my rage and just ignore it. But then when they'd leave, it'd fly. It'd have to come out of me, and so I'd be ridiculous.
Well, I think it's got to come out. I mean, even now I get really cranky, and I know sometimes that I'll go to the outside of the shed and I'll use the F word, F, and go harder and harder 3 or 4 times, and then I'll take a couple of big breaths and turn around and walk back in, and I'm all right, but I've got to let it out.
Look, one day when I was talking to my psychologist about it, and she said that, you've got to accept that things can go wrong for you. And some days you might wake up in bed and not want to get up. And you know what? You can have a bad day. So why don't you just not get up and have a bad day? Now, unfortunately for most people, we've got work commitments and you just can't do that. But for me, I was lucky working for myself. One thing that really gave me the confidence to know that it's okay for things to go wrong was one morning I woke up and I was in the blues, and it was just like the old times. I'd sort of, because my recovery was up, down, but always on average in up and, heading forwards. And I woke up and I felt terrible. And I thought, and then it dawned on me, okay, I'm having a bad day. Great, I'm having a bad day. I'm not going to work.
Great, I'm having a bad day.
Yeah.
But you recognised it.
Yeah. And so I'm lying in bed there and I thought, oh, great, I'm not going to work. I'm going to go into town. I might go and have lunch. I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And I thought, yeah, I'm going to have a day off. So I get out of bed and I start making some breakfast. And I thought, well, hang on a sec. Before I go into town, I actually better go and check those sheep. Because I didn't check them yesterday because I was too bloody lazy. And that's probably why I woke up feeling crap in the morning, because I hadn't really done what I said I'd do the day before. And so before I knew it, it was about 9 o'clock and I'm at work. I didn't go to town that day. So, things would go wrong and it's like I'd just start laughing and let it go wrong. And I guess for me, that was me accepting that something hadn't gone right. And also another thing I had to do was actually tell people what was going on. For years I'd lived a lie and now I couldn't live that lie. So whenever something was going wrong, I had to tell people. I think probably at times I was probably too honest, and I'd tell people things that were, weren't going right. And but to me, it was good. I was letting it out. I had to let it out.
Did you see true friends?
Yeah.
Whatever. Did most stand by?
Yeah, there's a couple of friends that stand out, and they just either kept ringing me, or just kept inviting me over to come and spend the afternoon, come and hang out.
So that's probably one of the reasons you got by, those small effort. Well, they look from the outside small efforts.
Oh, absolutely. And, the weekends can be a long time because you may not have much on and you've got nothing to do. And when a friend invites you over for the weekend and you can get away from your life, and it can be a great distraction. It can take you away from it and just give your mind and your body a bit of a rest. And someone might just keep ringing you and you might be avoiding them, and eventually you take that phone call because you're worried that they're probably going to judge you, and they don't judge you. They're just, g'day, how you going? It's nice to hear your voice. 10 minutes on the phone to a good friend like that can leave you with hours of just relief.
Which is better than feeling like shit 24/7.
Oh, God, yeah.
Okay. If we're going to be blunt, if we're going to be bloody blunt, what is the simple advice or direction should give to somebody to help them along the path to mental well-being? So what advice would you give to the young Chris Wilson?
Oh, look, I wish, I could go back and give myself, the advice to get out there and talk to someone about your problems. Your problems are never as big as you think they are. If I'd only talk to my family and friends about what I perceived my problems were, things would have been incredibly different for me.
Chris, when people are right at the bottom, and they've got to climb out, it's very difficult to climb out by yourself.
There's two great messages that I believe that need to be out there. And the first message is specifically for people that are unwell. And that is that there's no shame in having a mental illness. It's just a shame if you don't do something about it. And like we've been talking about, when you're at the bottom of your life and someone says that to you, that's like a kick in the face, because it's, I'm challenging them to say, come on, just do something about it. Well, that's not possible for someone in their mind that when they're at the bottom, and yet it actually is. And the way I got out of it was through my sister. And so when people are at the bottom of their life, they need to somehow be able to signal to some family and friends around them, can you help me? I need a hand up. And my message is to the rest of the crowd, to the people who are not experiencing a mental illness and who may never experience a mental illness, but they'll see it in their family and friends around them. And my message to them is that mental illness is not contagious. You will not catch an illness if you ask someone, are you okay? Are you all right? How are you going? What can I do? Or just standing by someone and giving them, that support. I believe ultimately your journey to better mental health is your own journey. The start of it is you'll be hanging on to someone's hand. It's in my case I was, and I think in yours and in many others that I've spoken to, there's always someone who is the catalyst to get you started. But it's your journey, and it's a good journey. It is a really good journey out, because all of a sudden anyone who's been in it will experience the downward spiral, but you actually get an upward spiral. And every day you can feel a little bit better. And for someone who's been in the hole for a long time, it's a hell of a relief.
Thanks, Chris. I mean, the aim of this podcast, the Mate Helping Mate podcast, is not just in talking about the stories and I suppose illuminating the triumphs of people and hoping they're inspiring. I'm really focused on practical help. And the beauty with the people we speak, like Chris, is that, okay, ultimately mental health comes back to talk, but all of us like action, and we really got to get off our asses and make the effort to talk and listen. So I want to thank you, Chris, very much for coming here and promoting your philosophies and telling us your life and offering up some strategies. Thanks, mate.
Thanks, John. Folks, if my story has affected you in any way, please call Lifeline. I know it might seem daunting, but it really can save your life. These people on the other end of the line are fantastic. And like I've said in this podcast, sharing your story will help. Lifeline's number is 13 11 14 131114. Please call them anytime, 24/7.
In finishing, a reminder that this podcast featured general information only, and we recommend that you get independent advice from a qualified professional like your GP. There's plenty of links on the Mate Helping Mate website as well, so you can contact service providers across the country. Head to matehelpingmate.org.au. This podcast was a Room 3 production and brought to you by our mates at Gotcha for Life and the Murrumbidgee Primary Health Network. We'd also like to thank Riverina Bluebell and David Post at ROC, or Rural Outreach Counselling, for their support. You can find out more about these organisations and the great work that they do on our Mate Helping Mate website. Other episodes of this podcast can be found on Spotify, Apple Podcasts and Stitcher Radio by searching for Mate Helping Mate and hitting subscribe. If you've liked what you've heard, make sure you leave a rating to make it easier for others to find us. You can also head to the Mate Helping Mate website and listen there. And better yet, you can share those links with your friends and family to start a conversation about mental health in the bush. This podcast was produced by Erin Johnson, Kayla Robertson and AJ Clifford for Room 3, a production company that works with not-for-profits and social enterprise across Australia. We want to say a big thank you to Chris Wilson for heading over to the farm and telling his story today. And finally, we've got to thank the man himself, John Harper, for all the years he's travelled this country, tirelessly working to improve mental health in rural and remote Australia. And there's also Mitch for all of her support for John throughout the years and her hospitality to our crew and all the guests who have come out to the farm during this time. Recorded and edited by AJ Clifford. Original music by Southwark Sounds and stock by Soundstripe. Thank you for listening, hoping you can move forward, and we hope this makes a difference.